and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we have two very important stories to look at. One with reference to the political scenario in Pakistan. We have seen time and again in the past as well that the opposition parties keep on talking about their plans to topple the government. This is what they've been saying, and this is what their so-called stance has been for a while now. And they also claim that they're going to be holding a long march, which is there, of course, against the price hike in the country, which is going to be there to bring forth the practices which are not serving the people. This, of course, is the stance of the opposition parties. However, what also remains a common factor in all of these instances is the fact that they never seem to have a coordinated stance themselves or a coordinated approach as to what it is that they are talking about. And the kind of efforts that we see from different political parties seem not to be in tangent with each other. Whether or not that is still true today, if there is any substance to the claims that they've been making with regards to all options that they want to exercise, specifically the talk about no confidence motion, which of course was a fourth line with the PPP joining the PTM. Whether or not that has changed now with the kind of stances we're hearing from Bilal Bhutto Zardari, who speaks about how if this option with regards to resignation is withdrawn and the strategy of no confidence motion is adopted, then perhaps the alliance can be joined. Is that something that is likely to happen? What really are the options that the opposition can exercise at this point? Are they going to get the support from the people in the Long March as they are suggesting? And do they even have the support of the allies within the ruling government that they also keep referring to? All of these issues will be discussed in detail in the show today. Another situation that we will be talking about is with regards to the evolving scenario in Afghanistan. We have highlighted many times in the past, and of course this is something that the entire world now knows, the kind of economic situation and the humanitarian crisis that the people of Afghanistan are facing. And the kind of footage and the kind of reports that we are hearing from the country are devastating, because there are people there who are queuing up in lines for food, for daily rations. There are kind people who are stepping up in order to help such people, but there are many who are facing extreme poverty conditions. And because of that, there are mothers in Afghanistan saying that they think about selling their daughters. And of course, one begins to think that if that thought actually comes in a mother's mind, what really is the situation that is going on in the country. However, so with regards to the situation that exists there, there's also a political scenario that is currently into play, and the official recognition of the Taliban regime is still a question mark, despite calls from the acting prime minister in Afghanistan, specifically to the Islamic countries as well, for official recognition, saying that they have actually met all the demands. If that is true or not is what is going to be discussed today. What really are the options that the international community can exercise, not just with relation to international aid, but also perhaps the unfreezing of assets, or moving in terms of an urgent need to address the situation that the people of Afghanistan currently are facing. We'll explore all of these issues in further detail in the show today. As usual, I've been joined by Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal in the studios. Thank you very much for being with me today. And of course, we will be joined by our respected analysts online as well. For our first segment with regards to the political scenario in Pakistan, we're going to be joined by political analyst Mr. Javed Jadoon Sahab, who's going to be with us online, and he's here. Thank you very much for joining us on the debate, sir. Welcome to the show. With regards to the situation, of course, surrounding the political scenario, there's a lot of question marks, a lot of speculation, a lot of talk about what the opposition really is going to do, what are their plans. Realistically speaking, and considering the history of this opposition and the claims they've been making and the actions that they've been taking, what really can we expect from these opposition parties? Are they really getting together this time around?
Are you asking me, Sana?
Yes, Mr. Javed, yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Sana. I think as far as the opposition is concerned, they have got very limited options to put any pressure on the government, because we have seen in the past as well, they tried to come out on the road and stage demonstrations to put the government into pressure, but they were not able to do that because of the disunity among their own ranks. Pakistan People's Party left the alliance PDM along with ANP, and now once again they are trying to put pressure on the government, and I think they are trying to use media as well. Why they are trying to use media, spreading some kind of information or disinformation regarding some kind of a deal with the establishment. And I mean, this shows that they do not have any coherent policy strategy to sort of put pressure on the government on their own because of their disunity. And now they believe that if
Well,
there
this,
is
of
any
course,
kind of a rift, perceived rift or notion
okay. Well, this, of
or,
course, also
or
points to the
notion
fact.
notion
Yes.
of any
Yes, continue, please.
yes, Sana, are if they believe that if there is even a notion notion of any rift between the government and the establishment, they believe that they could use it in their own favor, and they believe that there could be some kind of communication channels open with the opposition. And I
Right.
think, but on the contrary, I believe that it is only in the media. Government doesn't seem to be in any kind of a trouble right now, other than
Right.
the price hike and inflation
Right.
and
And
the
Jadun sir,
difficulties the people are facing.
Since we are talking about what the media has been doing, media has been actually speculating that People's Party and PDM might be coming together. Do you see any evidence of that at all, sir?
Farrukh, I really don't see a People's Party and People's Party coming back into the fold of PDM because of their fundamental differences. And I think when they departed the PDM, probably they had enough of it, and now they have even decided to go solo, and they have decided to go for a long march on the 27th of February. And I believe that they would like to leave their own mark as far as the political struggle is concerned. Pakistan People's Party believes that there are no chances of any restoration of trust between Pakistan Muslim League and the establishment, and they believe that there is a
Yeah.
possibility of
Mr.
Pakistan People's
Javed,
Party
is that
regaining
true
some
even
ground
if,
in Punjab.
right, Mr. Javed, is that true even if the PDM alliance actually opts for the no confidence motion that the PPP keeps talking about? Because this is what Bilawal has said. This could be an option for them.
Sana, there is definitely an option of no confidence in any democracy, in any form of parliamentary government. There is always a possibility and option of
No,
a
I
no
meant for the
confidence
PPP to
motion.
join
But
the
as
PDM
far as
if they
PDM
actually adopt
is
this
concerned,
strategy.
yes,
For the P.
this is
Oh,
what I'm saying. Sana,
okay.
option is one thing, but going for that option, I think it is extremely difficult for the opposition to go for this particular option, because if they fail to dislodge the government, they won't be
Yeah.
able to stage any other no confidence motion within 6 months of time period, and they know that. And then it would be end of the game as far as PDM is concerned, because 6 months down the line would be I mean, there would be every political party would be in the election board. So I think it is a very, very risky decision
Okay.
as well if they go for that, and they are unable to gather the required number to get the motion succeed in the National Assembly. I think that is the flip side, and PDM knows that.
Judun Sahab, if we look at the options, obviously, mainly the options are from the People's Party side. They have the strategy, and what they talk of is that they want to have PMLQ on board against the Punjab government, bring in a no confidence motion against them, and then the next, if we look at the strategies, next strategy is that rather than going towards the Prime Minister of Pakistan, they want to go towards the Speaker of the National Assembly. They want to bring a no confidence motion against him. Do you think that this time around PMLQ could be crucial, and People's Party and PDM, they would be successful to bring PMLQ in their own counters?
And if I can follow up on that, just very humbly, do you see any chance of PMLQ or other government allies actually ditching the government at all?
I think it is a very unlikely scenario right now that PMLQ or the other allies, including NQM, deserting PTI and going to join hands with PDM against the ruling party in Islamabad. Because I think, why should they do that? Because the time left is not sufficient enough. They wouldn't like to jump ships right now. And I believe that they would continue with the
Right. Another aspect of support.
And I think it's
Yes.
not alone. Uh,
Yes, Mr.
it's
Javed
not
sir, we were
only
just experiencing some problems with your
Pakistan.
voice. Yes, you may continue now.
Sana, yeah, I'm saying that it's not only PMLQ. They would require the support of MQM and other allied parties as well, because the numbers game is very.
Yeah.
There is an example that when no confidence motion was moved against the sitting Prime Minister, late Benazir Bhutto, it did not succeed despite the fact that many forces were in play. Now I think Prime Minister Imran Khan is in a very comfortable situation. I believe that PDM knows that, and they are talking about some kind of invisible hand. If the support of the invisible hand is withdrawn, this is what they're saying, then they would be able to win the no confidence motion. And I don't see that coming about as far as the no
Okay,
confidence
so
motion is
Mr.
concerned.
Javed,
And
does
even
this
it does come, I don't see any possibility of succeeding no confidence motion in the current circumstances.
okay, so does this mean realistically speaking, a no confidence motion is not an option for the PTM or the opposition parties?
Sana, it could be an option, but whether this
They're not
option
going
is
to do
going
it
to
if they know
succeed
it's
or
going to
not,
fail.
that is a $1 million question. I mean, option always remains for the opposition to go for the no confidence motion, but they have to have the required numbers. And if they don't have numbers, I think it is just a bluff, and it's just the talk of no
Okay.
confidence motion to put pressure on the PTI government. And I don't see anything beyond that.
And is the same kind of a bluff is also put forward when we talk about the long march and the kind of massive support that the opposition parties seem to claim to be enjoying when they call on the people for that against the government?
Sana, even in the past, I mean, they wanted to stage a kind of a massive long march or demonstration or a sit-in, whatever you call it. It never happened. And even now, Pakistan People's Party and the other opposition PDM, they are attempting to go solo towards Islamabad. But I mean, personally speaking, Sana, I don't any possibility of Pakistan People's Party sort of creating any serious trouble
Right.
for PTI government. And
And
so
Jatun
is the
Sab,
case with the PDM as well.
Jatun Sab, what do you
March is too far away.
right? And what do you make of the statements coming from PMLN leadership regarding Jahangir Tareen, and then the revival of Saraiki Suba, talks and repeated emphasis on that? Do you see that Jahangir Tareen and the Saraiki bloc might be actually something that the opposition is betting on?
Farrukh, I believe that right now every political player, every important political player, including Jahangir Tareen, they are watching the situation very carefully. They haven't made up their minds what they intend to do. They're looking towards the role of the establishment, or the perceived or the notion of any role being played by the establishment to dislodge the government in Islamabad. They believe that unless and until they always talk about the hidden hand. They always say that when there is any indication from the establishment, then they might go against the sitting government in Islamabad. Other than, I don't see. I mean, I don't see happening that. Why the establishment Pakistan Army would like to destabilize Imran Khan's government right now? Because they are in the fourth year. And the only remaining year, Farooq, we know that the coming budget would be the last budget of Pakistan Tehreek Insaf, and then
Right.
every political party goes into the election mode. So at this particular stage, I don't understand why there's a talk of any kind of a reconciliation between PMLN and the establishment, given the
Right.
fact that
You
Pakistan
know
Muslim
why,
League
sir?
and played every trick in their bag against the establishment. They
Right.
named names. They named Pakistan Army, the chief
Javed
of
Jadun
Pakistan
Sahab, you know
Army and the chief
why?
of the ISI.
Javed Jadun Sahab, you know why? Your and my
Yes,
profession, media people, they keep on creating all these illusions and keep on talking about it
yes,
because somehow they
absolutely,
feel
absolutely.
that they are going to be the
I agree
next
with you, Farooq.
ministers.
I
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you, Farooq. It is the media. I think it's because of the TRP factor, or they want to remain relevant as far as the current situation is concerned. I mean, so many pundits talking about. I mean, one starts believing that believing that they were sitting in certain and when the decisions were being made. They are talking about some kind of a deal between PMLN, and they are kind of conveying the message to the people or the viewers that they were probably privy to it. But I think media has always played a section of the media, I would say, for a played a very, very irresponsible role. They have been
Yeah.
For
discussing
sure.
certain issues which, I mean, they have not been in the interest of the country as well. Destabilizing a sitting government, a legitimately elected government, and any talk of role of the establishment to destabilize the elected government of Prime Minister Imran Khan, I don't understand what they are trying to achieve, other than their TRP factor, the factors of the interests of their media houses and the owners, etc. Beyond that, Farrukh, I don't see any reason why there's a talk of, I mean, every day you get up in the morning, you find a new conspiracy theory. And every conspiracy
Absolutely.
And
theory
that's,
leads towards
of
Rawalpindi
course,
or the army.
very unfortunate. Thank you very much, Mr. Javed Jadoon, for taking the time out and joining us in the segment today for the debate. Before we conclude and move on to the next segment, Farrukh, with regards to the scenario that we are, of course, experiencing and the kind of discussion we just had, does this mean that when we see all of this talk coming in from the opposition parties and the kind of issues being raised with regards to the competency of the current government, it means, as Mr. Javed was speaking, that there is no real trouble for the government? Is this something that is part of what happens in a political situation, specifically with regards to the kind of opposition we've seen in Pakistan? Or is something really at hand which perhaps the government needs to look inward as well as to how to incorporate stances or strategies that are relevant to the people of Pakistan and sort of are resonating with the mandate?
Right. Sana, I think all Pakistani media does every day is talk about the government's competency. Let us be honest about it. This is a new government, first time ever has taken over at the center. It believes in trial and error also. There might be mistakes, but it then corrects the course.
Okay.
But let us talk about the competence of the other two components,
Yeah.
right? The media that I just pointed out and the opposition that you just pointed out, right? Opposition, do you know why is Imran Khan Sahab, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, in such a comfortable position? Because the opposition keeps on cancelling itself out. You know, repeatedly at the center, I can tell you, it might be a different ball game, but in Punjab government or taking Punjab government is a low-hanging fruit. You know, numbers are very close, and of course, there are questions about the chief minister repeatedly raised by various quarters. But opposition could not do it because it could not come up with an alternative candidate. The last person, the final person that emerges is Hamza Shahbaz because he is the opposition leader.
Sure.
But from within his party, you know, Mariam Nawaz will not accept him as the candidate. So the parties that keep on cancelling themselves out cannot cancel a government out. Regarding the center, let me just point out that you were talking about the number game, right? And earlier there was a reference to the invisible hand also. The biggest problem with the media that is addled by supernatural stories and all these conspiracy theories is that they always believe, the media men believe, that there is always going to be some conspiracy. So these allusions to supernatural elements keeps on coming back, invisible hand, khalai makhluk, this, that and the other thing. But the truth is, media should be thriving on the you know, facts and evidence. If you don't have evidence, DG ISPR had to come on television and say, ask people about the evidence. None of the media men actually asked about the evidence. Regarding the center, I remind you that at the center, the PTI itself, its party alone has 156 seats, right? And the opposition in entirety has 162. How do you think that they are going to bring about any kind of no confidence motion?
Right.
Secondly, when you talk about the long march, I don't know, this must be the longest march in our history because it never starts. They last September or October, they started talking about it, and then they have plans to do it or stage it on 23rd March. I mean, one of the PDM at least is going to do it.
Right.
Tell me what is the hallmark of 23rd March? It is the National Day of Pakistan, Pakistan Day. And at that time, there is a parade in Islamabad. That means security is beefed up. And then there is a foreign dignitary in town as well. Therefore, the security is even further shored up.
Exactly.
At that time, you cannot very comfortably walk into Islamabad. So what exactly is the plan? That they be stopped earlier, like TLP was stopped. The problem is that because we have the worst period, most incompetent period opposition in the country,
Right.
or the country's history, hang on. That's why elements like TLP keep on getting more space because they are not doing their job.
And that, of course, Faisal, let me just welcome in the show our two guests, and then we can continue this conversation for a last comment. We have been joined by Mr. Sami Hamdi, who's an Arab journalist. Thank you very much for joining us. And Maya Lukhto, who's a journalist. She's also here with us online. Thank you very much for joining us on the debate. We'll just take quick comments from Faisal regarding what we were discussing earlier and move on to the situation in Afghanistan.
Just the 2 points I wanted to highlight. First of all, I just want to agree with Brother Farrukh that March is not possible. So that is out of the question. There is one very important factor I want to highlight. If we look at the strategies and if we look at the things the opposition is looking at, I don't think that they are serious enough. They just want to create a nuisance value. They just want to create a sort of power show before the elections. Of course, we know that the general elections is not far, a year almost left. So I don't think they have anything in the baggage. And if we look at the no confidence motion, their strategy says that they want to start it with the Punjab government and then come towards the Speaker of the Assembly and not towards the Prime Minister of Pakistan. So they themselves, they do not want to get rid of the government. They just want to give a setback to the government.
And that, of course, is the unfortunate part when if there is actually no plan.
And one very important point, if we look at the PMLN London, I have sources who are telling me that they themselves, who are very closer towards Hamza Shahbaz and Shahbaz Sharif, they tell me that they are being told by PMLN London that do not use the word Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif. Why? Because they just want to give all of the powers and all of the influence to Maryam Nawaz. So there is a clear rift, clear difference between
within
both
the
of the
parties,
sectors
within the parties, within
so
the alliance,
I think
all of it. Absolutely.
There's no point talking about it.
Well, let's move.
Just to highlight the point, we are talking about family members. They are blood relations and they cannot agree on a candidate.
Exactly.
When you cannot even agree on your own cousin, your own brother, what else are you going to agree on?
True.
Right. Let's talk about the situation in Afghanistan now. With regards to, of course, the humanitarian crisis and economic collapse that is going on, it is a worrying situation, and our hearts go out to the people in Afghanistan. But of course, there are a lot of matters of concern with regards to how we can actually help the people of Afghanistan with the Taliban regime in power and the way the international community has its expectations. Something that has come out from the acting Prime Minister in Afghanistan is a statement where he talks about how the international community must move forward with official recognition as all the conditions have been met. Mr. Sami, how accurate is this statement?
I think it's difficult to ascertain. It's difficult to determine to what extent the Taliban have met the conditions that the US have imposed. I think that we've heard reports, of course, that Turkey has helped to set up schools for female education. We've heard that the Taliban have announced that they've almost finished setting up the security apparatus with more than 90,000 personnel. We've seen that the Taliban have been visiting neighboring countries, Iran and the like, going and trying to assert itself and say we are going to respect the security of the borders. We are not going to cause trouble essentially for our neighbors. We've seen that they've been pushing this diplomatic drive. But I think the issue for the Taliban and why they felt the need to make this statement is because there is an increasing realization, if perhaps they didn't realize before, though I think they did, that the US is not necessarily interested in the fulfillment of the conditions as much it's more as it's still in a state of confusion as to how it should approach Afghanistan following the chaotic withdrawal. It appears that there is no consistent policy coming from Washington as to whether they should work with the Taliban, recognize the Taliban, isolate the Taliban, or squeeze the Taliban. And I think that's why we're seeing increasing maneuvers, whether that's from Imran Khan, whether that's from other parties that are perhaps facilitating the communication, saying to the US, listen, at some point you're going to need to decide because of these humanitarian crises. And there was an article today in the New York Times, an opinion piece stressing that while the US is mulling over what it should do with Afghanistan, it should not compromise on the safety of the
But
Afghan
Sami, the
people
call
and their
actually
right
goes
to a
out
decent life
to not
by
just the
releasing
US,
those.
but also the Islamic countries, specifically the Islamic countries as well.
If we could ask Maya about the current situation, because Maya has just returned back from Kabul a couple of days ago. So I just wanted to know what's the current situation, the ground realities of Afghanistan, because we are hearing very bad news from Afghanistan that people are queuing up for the bread and all. And I just wanted to know what's going on, Maya.
Absolutely, yes. The situation is getting worse by the day. And I visited Kabul, I visited Kandahar and Helmand. And in Kandahar province, I visited actually a clinic that was now receiving 100 mothers every day on a daily basis. And they were bringing every day 20 to 30 new malnutrition babies to the clinic. And the clinic is out of supplies. They don't have any medicine. They don't have even the money to buy fuel for the generator. They don't even have fuel for the ambulance. So it is a very, very serious situation that we are seeing. But at the same time, I have to say that there are also, like in the cities, there are people who still have money. Like you still see people going to restaurants, also women. So there are still people who somehow manage to deal with the situation. But I think the more time passes, the more difficult things will get for even people who are more well off.
Right. Ms. Lukhto, since we are talking about ground realities in Afghanistan, can you confirm or deny the reports that Uzbekistan, that actually exports the bulk of electricity into Afghanistan, has cut off the supply because of the pending bills, and that is why there is electricity problem in the entirety of Afghanistan as well?
Well, you know, that's a little bit hard for me to assess because I was staying at hotels where they do have generators, but I do know that there has always been a lot of electricity problems in Afghanistan. And yes, I am hearing that they are getting worse, and definitely every day there were power cuts, but I'm not sure how serious those problems are. And I'm sure there are a lot of differences also between like cities and then more far off remote regions when it comes to electricity supply.
Right, Maya, when you spoke earlier with regards to, of course, how there are certain people who are still dealing with better than others, and we have women also sitting in restaurants. How would you see the overall picture that is the entire world is perceiving Afghanistan with regards to, of course, the humanitarian situation and also with regards to women in Afghanistan? How aligned are the reports that are actually coming out from Afghanistan with the situation that's actually there?
Well, with regard to the humanitarian crisis, I think it is very accurate. The situation is really bad. However, there were a lot of problems before during the previous government as well. I mean, actually, there was more hunger in Afghanistan in 2019 than there was at the end of the previous Taliban rule. So, you know, that there were a lot of problems even before, but now, of course, with the sanctions and so on, things have definitely gotten a lot worse. When it comes to women, I do feel that there are a lot of comments being made by people who haven't actually been back since the Taliban took over. Because when you read certain people's comments or maybe even some of the reporting in the media, you sort of get this view that women are not allowed to go anywhere, they're not allowed to do anything anymore, and they have to dress a certain way. But this is not true. What I saw was there were just as many women around in Kabul as before. Now, this time around, previously I went there in September, like a couple of weeks after the country fell to the Taliban. Then yes, definitely I saw less women. But now they have pretty much come back to the streets, and they are going around, and they are also largely wearing the same things that they wore before. Also, you see women working. I saw women at the airport working and check-in. But there are, of course, restrictions, certain rules, or more like recommendations by the Taliban that women should not work in the office after 4 p.m.
Right, and Maya, I want to talk about that in further detail, but let me just go to Sami first.
Yeah, if I can ask a question from Sami. Brother Sami, we know that the leader of the Taliban is seeking obviously, if they can accept, the West can accept, and the other countries can accept the Taliban government in Afghanistan, telling the facts that they are meeting with the challenges and with the requirements of the Westerners and of the other governments of the region as well. So right now, don't you think that this factor, the humanitarian factor, is enough for the other countries, for the Western countries and for Western powers as well, to accept the current government, to engage with them for the cause of the humanitarian crisis, and we can just counter the humanitarian crisis?
And can I add to this, just because the appeal, this particular appeal was to the Muslim nations that they ought to recognize the Afghan Taliban government. My question is, will this appeal actually find any kind of traction with any of the main players of the Arab world, GCC, or for that matter OIC? Because at this moment it seems that there are concerns.
Absolutely. Thank you, Farrukh. My question was lost in the middle of the conversation, so thanks for repeating that.
I think that with regards to the first point, I think the tragedy of what's unfolding in Afghanistan is that the considerations of the US and of the Western states is far more political than it is humanitarian. Biden has just seen a catastrophe with regards to the manner in which he withdrew from Afghanistan. Boris Johnson in Parliament yesterday, in the UK Parliament, talked about how Afghans were rescued from Afghanistan after the Taliban took over. In other words, the political narrative is still one of the Taliban as barbarians and still one of essentially a foreign policy disaster and defeat. And Biden still is not sure how he can explain to the American people what happened in Afghanistan. And therefore, in this climate, if he turns around and recognizes the Taliban, even on humanitarian prospects, then it just compounds the damage that he's done to his foreign policy, or at least the image of his foreign policy, given his approval ratings are beginning to slide and go down as a result of domestic issues. And I think that's the tragedy, in that what's holding up the humanitarian aid is the inability of the likes of Johnson, Macron, of Biden and the like to explain to their people in a way that suggests that it is not a disaster or a catastrophe to recognize the Taliban. So until Biden finds a way to be able to say to the Americans that there's a way to recognize the Taliban without it looking like a humiliating defeat, Biden is not going to be giving that aid anytime soon. And that's why I said that there is confusion on the part of US policy. With regards to the OIC countries and Muslim countries,
unless we have the US recognizing the government in Afghanistan, we shouldn't really expect much from the Islamic countries.
And this is the point. This is why I started with the Biden, in that it links directly to your question with regards to the Islamic countries. Saudi Arabia will not recognize the Taliban if Biden doesn't recognize the Taliban and put itself subject to accusations of supporting terrorism. The UAE is not going to do the same. Qatar, which facilitated the mediation, which chased the Taliban office for years, which tried to position itself as that interlocutor and that mediator, even Qatar is not willing to recognize the Taliban government if Biden is not willing to do so. The fear of Biden is greater than any damage that might
Of course, they are not recognizing Afghan government at this moment. But does it prove that it is because of the US? Because every country has to have their own agency, right? They have to have their own free will. So even the countries which are averse to the US influence at all, like Iran, I don't think they have recognized the Afghan Taliban government. Did they attribute everything to President Biden or their own decisions as well?
I think there are two things that are worth highlighting on this regard. Even if Biden is not recognizing, that doesn't mean that OIC countries are not lobbying the US to recognize the Taliban or at least facilitate humanitarian aid. We heard President Erdogan talk about sending a train of humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. We've seen Qatar send flights and humanitarian flights to Afghanistan. We've seen the UAE in talks with Erdogan about facilitating aid to Afghanistan. So there are attempts to convince the US to change its position. With regards to Iran, Iran has very different dynamics when it comes to the Taliban. Iran is not necessarily driven by the US, but driven as to how do we handle the impact of the Taliban being in government on our border? What the affirmations can we get from the Taliban to ensure that our border, one, is safe, but also that we have access and influence in Afghanistan? Iran is playing a leverage game, a wrestling match with the Taliban, dangling the prospect of recognition, even though I don't think it will recognize Taliban in the near future, in order to squeeze them and gain some sort of advantage.
Sami, yes, we were making a different point actually. Yes, Farrukh.
And just wanted to understand what else is stopping all these countries. You're talking about the influence game. Every country has their own, plan. But the concern at this moment is you're talking about 50 plus countries that you're telling me don't seem to have any agency at all. Do you think that if they wanted to actually recognize a country, like for example Turkey, when it was opposing the Israeli government, they kept on doing it despite the US pressure. But we don't see any of these countries coming forward. Do you attribute all of this to foreign influence or their own decision not to do it?
I think I attribute it to interest. The reality is that Biden at any point could decide that if anybody supplies funding to the Taliban or any humanitarian aid goes to the Taliban, those countries should be put under sanctions. That aid might be used as a means to deliver weapons or deliver money to the Taliban. The money might fall in the Taliban arms and the like. And the reality is that
we understand that that's a consequence, and that's perhaps the reason why this decision is there. Point taken, Sami. We need to go to Ms. Maya as well. Maya, earlier what you were talking about with regards to the situation that women are experiencing in Afghanistan, of course, the kind of scenario that perhaps we are understanding with regards to the new restrictions that have also been imposed by the Ministry of Virtue and Vice with regards to the restrictions on movement and restrictions in workplaces. Perhaps the kind of things that you've said are new or have come as a surprise that are perhaps not as strict as what the situation says. So is that what it is? Is the way that we're seeing the situation with women protesters not being treated fairly, or a lot of restrictions put on women movement not being done as strictly as we're seeing, and there is progress to what the Taliban seems to have committed with regards to women rights?
So I feel there's two different things here. One of them is these protests that we are seeing that are happening every now and then. And yes, the Taliban have reacted to them in a very, well, not a very democratic way, perhaps. They have tried to stop these demonstrations. They've also stopped journalists from covering them. But at the same time, the other issue is that, for example, I mean, I'm a little bit confused sometimes about these protests in terms of, like, for example, they were protesting against mandatory hijab. Now, even in Kabul, every woman has always worn the hijab in the past 20 years during the Taliban rule. It was always part of the culture. So, and the Taliban have not actually really imposed anything in terms of like everybody has to wear the burqa or anything of this sort. So I'm not sure if they are really like protesting against Taliban policies as such, because from what I understand, these restrictions are more of recommendations. Yes, certain Taliban guards or, you know, at checkpoints points
so you mean to say there's no consequence if these recommendations are not followed?
If I can, Maya, if I can ask you a question,
and please also answer this question as well.
Yeah, as you were there in Afghanistan right now, we have been hearing in quite a few news pieces about people forced to sell their daughters, obviously to get some money and all. Could you please confirm this, and who are the people who are actually buying their daughters, and for what they are buying for? Could you please
Yes,
elaborate that?
this is another thing that is a little bit confusing. So I feel there's two things going on here. Obviously, when there's the topic of child marriage, and this gets maybe confused with child selling in a way that the family then gets this the dowry, for this child bride. This might be going on, and of course, these kind of situations will force certain families to get their daughters married off at a very early age, and this has been happening in Afghanistan, unfortunately, for a long time. This child selling thing, I did not really encounter anything of this sort, but perhaps there is something like that happening as well.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
Maya, I'm just...
Can I talk to Faisal and just highlight one very quick thing?
Sure.
Credit where credit is due. This story about a 12-year-old girl that she was sold off to an aging man, and then he married her. That story was broken by CNN. And then amazingly, CNN kept track of that report. And in the end, they managed to actually have some action against the man, and the child was returned to the family and then given protection as well. So where there is good work, let us also praise
Absolutely,
that.
and we obviously hope to see more of that. Maya, I'm still a little confused regarding what you spoke about earlier in terms of recommendations coming in. The word recommendations implies that perhaps there's no real need for them to be followed, and the jurisdiction to follow them is upon the people or the women. Is that so? So does that mean that there's no real necessity for women to have a male member, for example, occupy them if they're traveling a certain distance? They can choose to move about as freely?
You're being polite. You're calling it necessity. The question is compulsion or coercion.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't really know. I think a lot of it depends on how the Taliban, I mean, at the checkpoints, the Talibs, how they choose to interpret it. Because in the current situation, there are no laws. This is something that we need to keep in mind. And when these instructions were released, it did say that they were a recommendation. But again,
So you mean to say there is no report of any case of someone violating these recommendations to face any sort of negative consequences?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure people will face negative consequences. And I did hear from women who had been trying to go to work. I spoke to a nurse in Kabul who said that the Taliban were giving her a hard time because she didn't have a mahram with her when she was going to work, even though this wasn't even I think it was a certain distance that a woman shouldn't travel longer than 72 kilometers or something like that. It might have been something else, but obviously her commute was not even close to being that long, and she was still facing issues. So that's what I'm saying, is that it really depends on the individual Talib and how they choose to see things, and it's a very confusing situation.
Right. Sami, when we see these kind of reports coming out from Afghanistan and what we were earlier talking about, a lot of emphasis is perhaps being put on the international community in the United States, and perhaps with reason, but there's a lot of things that the Taliban regime are also expected to do, have committed to do, and perhaps need to do before they can actually call out for the official recognition or the kind of place that they're aspiring towards in the international community. Is that being done even? Has there been any sort of progress since the Taliban regime came to power? Do you see that they have perhaps tried to move a step towards what they have actually committed towards, and what is a natural expectation from the regime?
I think what's clear is that the reports are inconclusive. I think it's clear that while we read some reports that suggest that it's disaster and it's hellfire in Afghanistan and the Taliban are really clamping down on the Afghan people, we hear reports from those who then go to Afghanistan and come back and say it doesn't appear to be the same way as the way that we're reading the reports, which suggests that there appears to be a war of narratives that is taking place. And I think that alludes a lot to how the West are trying to justify what happened to Afghanistan after the catastrophic withdrawal. I think more important than official recognition at the moment for the Taliban is receiving that financial aid with which they can actually temper some of the hard economic troubles that the Afghan people are experiencing. And I think here is where the tragedy lies, that irrespective of how you feel about the Taliban, it's wrong that finances should be withheld that can help ease the pressures of a daily Afghan citizen who has committed no wrong with regards to the politics that is unfolding. And I think that's what has bewildered the Taliban. That's what's bewildered Imran Khan. That's what's bewildered Qatar. It's what's bewildered Turkey and the other countries, sort of suggesting that you can see people suffering and still you won't even release the financial aid. When Macron came out and said that we won't officially recognize the Taliban, but we might provide humanitarian aid, or at least that was the implication, that humanitarian aid is still not going, primarily because of the politics. And I think this is why when we're looking at whether the Taliban should fulfill the conditions or not, the reality is these conditions should be irrelevant to the provision of humanitarian aid. They should be irrelevant to the release of finances that can help temper that humanitarian aid. And I think the reality of the situation is that eventually the US will come to a realization, if they haven't already, that they must work with the Taliban if they want to get anything done.
Well,
and this is why
let's see
it is really
we're
a
almost out of
disaster
time, so
that
just
the only thing
last.
preventing
Thank
that from
Maya,
happening
look, though,
is that
thank
there
you,
is no
Sami
good
Hamid.
story to tell.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Sami. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Thank you, Maya, for being with us on the show. Faisal, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Maya about, of course, she has just returned from there. I just wanted to know how serious a threat ISIS Khorasan is to people of Afghanistan.
Thank you.
And how concerned they are from ISIS Khorasan and what Taliban are doing for it.
And of course, that
thank
would
you
be a
for
very
actually
important
pointing
discussion.
out, because I think that we can talk about all these conditionalities about
Right.
human rights and everything. In the end, it is going to be about hard power, ETIM, IMU, TTP, ISIS Khorasan. Any of these elements, are they tolerated or they are fought
Exactly.
with?
Right.
If the Afghan government satisfied the Western concerns, I think, or Russian or Chinese, I think recognition will come.
Well, that of course is the hope, and a lot of it also remains on the fact, Farrukh, earlier when we were discussing the fact that the first quarter of this year is going to be an important one, and we're 20 days down into it, and we don't really see any sort of progress in actual aid or actual help being given to the people of Afghanistan. And unfortunately, again, just like the situation in Kashmir, we keep saying a lot of shoulds, and we keep appealing to humanity, but that doesn't seem to be an appeal that is really being heard by anybody at the moment. But we, of course, hope that that situation changes, and that when we discuss the situation in Afghanistan in future days, it is a better scenario for the people of the country. That's all we have for today from the debate. Thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow at 9.